A former maid appears with a portrait of Prince Andrew that no palace public relations could conceal behind staged smiles and public bows. She reveals hidden tendencies, tiny cruelties, and an entitlement that developed into a habit over decades in her tale. Indeed, there was no celebration to commemorate his release in December of 2010. Today, we piece together the evidence, the little incidents that reflect a greater truth about privilege and power, including whispered commands, secret humiliations, and favors traded for silence. When Prince Andrew addressed a court in New York, he publicly denied all of the accusations against him and demanded a trial by jury. He also asked what happens when servants speak and the crown's pristine image is damaged. Let's discover the pure truth. Long before the controversies and news stories, the valet had too much within the royal residence. Behind closed doors, there was a more subdued tale being told. The servants who worked for the royals on a daily basis whispered a tale. The majority of outsiders would think of palace employees as devoted, well-groomed professionals who gracefully navigate marble corridors. However, the reality was far more nuanced, particularly for those tasked with working close to Prince Andrew. They were the ones that felt the strain the most, and some of them even harbored secret animosity that they rarely dared to express. Paul, Prince Andrew's personal valet, was the source of one of those sounds. He lived in an apartment right next to Andrew's quarters and had worked for the prince for decades. For years, he organized Andrew's possessions, packed his clothes, and catered to all of his needs. But behind the polished shoes and official titles, Paul led a totally different life. In the words of many who knew him, he detested his work. The prince's actions were the reason, not the long hours. The prince would make little, almost absurd requests, which just made things worse. Bendix was the name of Andrew's Jack Russell Terrier. It was a peculiar name choice that many people thought was bizarre. Even odd was Andrew's practice of awakening his valet whenever the dog woke up in the middle of the night. Andrew would call Paul right away at 2 or 3 in the morning by ringing a direct phone line or pressing a private doorbell. After rushing and half drowsy, Paul would take the dog outside and wait in the dark, attempting to remain awake by smoking a cigarette. These odd responsibilities turned into nocturnal disruptions that left him weary and resentful. Occasionally, while royal guards patrolled the gardens, they would run into Paul, who frequently took advantage of the late hours to vent. He did not hesitate to tell them that he hated the prince. His remarks were scathing and full of the kind of annoyance that only develops after years of abuse. Even those used to royal entitlement were astonished by Andrew's rudeness, demands, and frequent cruelty, he claimed. Paul even made the ominous jest that he hoped Andrew would go over a mountain on the prince's next ski trip. The resentment was so intense. But it wasn't just one individual who harbored animosity. Many insiders thought that Andrew's misbehavior had been tolerated for far too long. Some even said that the outcome may have been different if Prince Philip had stepped in sooner, possibly even forcing a bar of soap into Andrew's mouth the first time he cursed at a servant. Rather, Andrew was treated as though he could never do wrong and grew up without limitations. In a society where hierarchy ruled everything and was present everywhere, staff publicly stated that he was the queen's favorite and that he was a prince protected from consequences. The palace did not function as a typical workplace. It was more like to a tiny kingdom inside a larger one. There were 3 cantons for the staff. White glove service and French cuisine are reserved for important officials. One for administrative staff and another for the lowest level employees, the footmen and maids who resorted to using kettles and microwaves. Even in the staff passageways, people moved in silence, knowing exactly where they were in this strict hierarchy. Many who joined at a young age remained for the rest of their lives. Their world, family, and identity were shaped by the royal household. Not only was loyalty encouraged, it was incorporated into the walls. And there was something risky about that loyalty. Nobody was going to challenge Andrew, no matter how terribly he behaved. Not even the protection policemen who accompanied him everywhere, not the footman or valet. They were employees, not pals. Their job was to keep him safe, not to question him. It brings up a much more sinister query. Insiders only dared to murmur it when everything fell apart. If this was his behavior in the palace, what would happen if no one was around to witness it? You will be taken to a different darkness by what follows, so stay with us. It was the quiet that kept him safe. The more you learn about the royal household, the more obvious it is that authority protects conduct rather than merely influencing it. Prince Andrew's world was set up such that every imperfection, bad decision, and hurtful comment just fell between the cracks by the time he was an adult. People whispered and saw him, but no one confronted him. The prince's existence beyond the royal gates would subsequently be the subject of serious inquiries due to this atmosphere of silence. He was surrounded by protection policemen who characterized their work as one of duty without judgment. They were the quiet shadows that were always there but never got in the way. Those inside the system knew the reality, even if it might appear implausible to outsiders that these officers were unaware of every aspect of Andrew's personal life. No matter how warm the smiles or how casual the discussions, a protection officer is not a confidant. They worked as employees. They did not accompany him into personal spaces. And they didn't ask him why or where he went. Their work was easy. Make sure he's safe. Fail to hold him responsible. However, they saw hints even from a distance. Little clues that things wasn't quite right. Odd travel plans, strange company, abrupt changes in routine. It didn't add up at the moment. Some cops, however, understood after the fact that they may have been observing the outlines of a much more sinister tale. At the palace, employee loyalty served as a buffer, safeguarding not only reputations but also behavioral patterns. Even though she might notice something fishy, a maid would never disclose it. For fear of losing the only life he has ever known, a footman may overhear a troubling exchange but choose to remain silent. Discipline was seen as loyalty first, followed by questions by senior officials, many of whom were ex-military officers. Above them all stood Andrew, shielded by his position, his lineage, and a queen who cherished him. Nevertheless, the fissures were apparent even in this strictly regulated setting. He was characterized as being entitled, immature, and unwilling to take accountability. One example of a man who never outgrew his most infantile behaviors is his well-known teddy bear incident, in which he insisted that employees arrange dozens of stuffed animals in a particular order each day. Many perceived him as acting more like an emotional child than a seasoned royal figure. And the outcomes can be unsettling when someone with that worldview is granted unrestricted. Who could possibly stop him, was a question that palace employees frequently wondered in private. There was little to no punishment, criticism was prohibited, and discipline was lax. Those who worked under him the longest were frequently the most cynical, publicly claiming that he was the only monarch who regularly caused issues. Even among his siblings, his actions were unusual, and others were perplexed by how he kept getting away with so much. This culture of quiet was not limited to the walls of palaces. It eventually permeated the outer world, particularly when Andrew started making connections outside of England. Whispers began to become fears at that point, private issues became public scandals, and the prince was no longer able to conceal himself behind the silent allegiance of servants who had once shielded him from everything, including himself. If you were taken aback by that, you should wait to hear what another employee revealed about him. Andrew, Prince, took off his mask. At one point in her life, Charlotte Briggs thought that the greatest honor she could get would be serving the royal family. She envisioned mutual respect, kindness, awakening goodness, and loyalty forming character. Nothing, however, prepared her for the reality she entered at the age of 21. What she had imagined would be a crown-polished dream turned out to be the kind of position that no employee wanted, a place in a palace where looks were everything. However, the conduct that took on behind closed doors was quite different. The world once praised Prince Andrew, Duke of York, as a lovely public person, but he was not. He was regarded by those closest to him as impolite, aggressive, and surprisingly entitled behind the stately gates and spotless hallways of Buckingham Palace. And Charlotte was soon faced with a man whose rage could transform the slightest mistake into a full-fledged storm, despite her initial desire to serve with pride when she entered his world. When she eventually spoke up years later, her statements lacked the tactfulness of someone attempting to be courteous. Her candid, incisive interview was driven by experiences she was no longer able to conceal. "I don't care what Andrew feels," she continued. She described him as awful, rude, and a man who brought her to tears more times than she could remember. The world was given a unique glimpse into the Duke as his staff knew him when her testimony gained traction. Not the balcony and charming royal appearances, but the unpleasant master who used everyone around him as props. In her early recollections, Andrew was portrayed as a man who thought the world was there to help him. He gave orders for things he could easily complete on his own, as if doing so would diminish his standing. One of his greatest obsessions became curtains. Not their fabric, not their color, but the small space Charlotte used to leave between them. A tiny variation that was hardly perceptible. But it was enough to cause one of his renowned tantrums. Using words well beyond the dignity of a prince, he screamed at her as he stormed out of his office that day and marched down the hallway. The hallways echoed with his voice. Workers froze. Charlotte wept. And everyone was reminded that even perfection was dangerous in Andrew's world. But his rage wasn't the most bizarre aspect. It was his insistence. Strange customs that were almost infantile but were applied with military rigor. His notorious collection of stuffed animals, which included a black panther, a hippo, and 72 teddy bears, had to be arranged precisely. Like a map of a battlefield, laminated instruction sheets determined their positions. Even Charlotte received extensive training on how to manage the stuffed animals, as if she were getting ready for royal guards rather than a bed full of plush toys. He had a similarly exacting bedroom. It was necessary to center pillows to the millimeter. Perfectly positioned pajamas. At sunrise, the bears that had been on display during the day were put back in place. Whispering to one another, the staff wondered what kind of grown-up needed these rituals to function. Charlotte, however, didn't find it whimsical. It was very draining. It felt like walking on glass every day. If he made one mistake, his rage would flare up again. The similar pattern was verified by other servants. Andrew belittles employees just to remind them of their status, barks commands to demonstrate his control, and demands adoration without showing the slightest decency. Andrew did not bear the burden of royalty like his siblings did. The throne was not his destiny. He didn't have a lot of obligations. He nevertheless acted like a monarch over terrified subjects. It wasn't just teddy bears and tantrums in Charlotte's story. It was about a tyrant who took pleasure in dismantling people and who created an environment so oppressive that even a palace seemed like a trap. Furthermore, this was just the start. Well, no, this was not the start. Even Charlotte was aware of something about Andrew. Let's examine the process of becoming a royal. Andrew's harsh childhood. In the palace, rumors circulated that young Andrew was odd from the minute he could walk. Strangely cruel, but neither mischievous nor inquisitive. Andrew walked through the regal corridors as if the world already belonged to him, while Charles was engrossed in his books and persevered through hardships. In the slightest times, the personnel became aware of it first. The way he yelled to get attention, how he used every space as a stage, and how, depending on his mood, he could control, tease, or break everyone. As a youngster, he appeared to be attracted to cruelty in the same way that other kids were to toys. He made faces and made fun of the stiff posture of the Queen's guards as he strutted in front of them, rather than laughing shyly next to them. He remained interested even while they remained motionless as required by duty. His anger rose. To feel victorious, he pushed harder, attempting to make them react. It was the first indication of a trend that would continue to follow him for many years. If he was unable to get respect, he would be content with dominance. But not only others were harmed by his outburst. He felt irritated and bored with animals as well. When the family dogs didn't move quickly enough, he kicked them, laughed when they yelled, and struck the legs of horses with sticks to make them quiver. The grooms, who are often quiet and incredibly patient, finally lost it. They once carried him to a pile of manure and buried him head first after he hit a horse too many times. Severe, startling, and unforgettable. However, they believed it to be the only language he could understand. That wasn't the worst of it, though. He was bullied in every aspect of his early life. As a favored victim, his younger brother Edward suffered from injuries no one dared to question aloud: slaps, shives, and stolen desserts. Siblings don't play nasty games like these. Andrew had to prevail in these competitions. Moments when he demonstrated his dominance over a smaller, softer person than himself. The palace employees took the worst of it every day. After being teased so much, one footman lost his temper and punched the young prince, giving him a black eye. The queen surprised him when he went to her expecting to be dismissed. She turned down his resignation. Andrew had gone too far, and the boy's actions had devolved into something more than innocent mischief, even she appeared to see. Nothing in school softened him. During prep school and then at Gordonstown, students cruelly nicknamed him out of fear and fury rather than jealousy. His snarls, laughing, and tantrums were all well known, and they were always directed at someone else. He was characterized by his teachers as arrogant, self-centered, and unruly. The behavior continued into old age. It became sharper. He was rumored to have smeared food on the faces of female employees, pulled at their clothing during palace functions, and yelled obscene commands at workers as though they were there only to amuse him. He destroyed other children's shelters, threw their possessions into rivers, and observed their suffering as though it were amusement during camping excursions. In one agonizing sentence, those who worked closest to him summed it up. He wasn't brought up like a royal. He threw things to the ground, cursed at employees, and gave orders by barking rather than talking, acting like a little tyrant. It was as though he believed that everyone else was there to serve him. Even if these tales are unsettling, they also pose a more significant query. Because things become much clearer when we move from Andrew's early actions to those of the soldiers who served beside him. What exactly makes Andrew unique among working royals, then? Let's examine his conduct more closely and see why it is so much worse than that of other royal officers. Observe further. In regal contrast, Andrew the Prince versus his siblings. From the perspective of those who work for them, not every royal is created equal in the complex world of the British royal household. Prince Andrew's entitlement and immaturity made him particularly challenging to work for, according to former employees who frequently draw sharp contrasts between him and his family. Andrew's actions apparently caused conflict and annoyance at every step, while other family members gained loyalty and respect through justice and kindness. Palace employees, for example, recalled Prince Charles as always kind, understanding, and considerate of his subordinates. He is said to take the time to thank employees for their hard work, occasionally pausing to speak with him in the halls or on the lawns and simply saying thank you. His tone was professional, not harsh, even when he expected long hours or exacting standards, and employees frequently left their jobs feeling appreciated rather than denigrated. Although these actions may appear insignificant, they had a significant impact in a strictly hierarchical setting like the palace. They established a culture of respect and decency that permeated every level. In a similar vein, Prince Edward was known for being personable and thoughtful. Employees have reported feeling at ease in his presence, pointing out that he seldom acted irrationally or required pointless chores. He avoided the erratic nocturnal orders that apparently became Andrew's signature, but he upheld expectations befitting his position. Whereas Edward's workers could expect a steady, equitable workload, Andrew's valet might be called up in the middle of the night to walk a dog or run other odd tasks. Despite their modest variances, these show a significant contrast in the royals' leadership styles and character traits. Staff members also admired Princess Anne because of her strong work ethic. Although her home was said to run smoothly, she did not view her staff as objects of whim or amusement but rather as collaborators in their work. Former employees frequently characterize her as professional but approachable, someone who fostered loyalty via skill rather than intimidation or partiality. Instead than worrying about erratic behavior, Anne's fairness encouraged her employees to take pride in their job despite her strict schedules. Prince Andrew, on the other hand, allegedly left employees feeling worn out, irritated, and occasionally humiliated. His wacky or childlike requests, such as the iconic teddy bear arrangements or being called in at 2 a.m. for unimportant jobs, are described by former maids and valets as sources of ongoing stress. According to one former maid, working under Andrew was the one bad experience she had in her royal career since he constantly spoiled the environment. Unlike his brothers and peers, Andrew's actions appeared to be motivated by a sense of entitlement that has been fostered by his lifetime privilege. A lack of boundaries and a feeling of being the Queen's favorite during his childhood. The palace system itself was not intrinsically repressive, as this contrast demonstrates. Many royals, even in the strict order, showed respect for their staff. Andrew's upbringing and attitude produced a particularly challenging atmosphere. As demonstrated by the experiences of individuals serving other family members, palace life gave chances for equitable treatment and respect for one another, even while it also required obedience and caution. In the end, these differences depict not only Andrew personally but also the larger dynamics in the royal household. Both privilege and duty can coexist. Respect can temper entitlement, and leadership in the family is determined by both title and personal behavior. The contrast between Andrew's actions and his relatives' more thoughtful methods emphasizes that life itself, not the palace, was the issue. The prince's decisions and personality were at issue. What other accusations, outside the domestic workers, have surfaced due to his concerning actions? However, how pervasive is this behavior? Watch this space as we reveal the undiscovered tales. Prince Andrew was shaken by the accusations. From day one, the legends surrounding Prince Andrew extended well beyond the walls of the palace. A darker, far more serious story lurked in the background, while the early stories concentrated on employees, valets, maids, and footmen putting up with tantrums, unrelenting demands, and harsh whims. Eventually, accusations of sexual assault and wrongdoing would become well known throughout the world, exposing a pattern. A guy enveloped in privilege, unbridled authority, and the mute compliance of those in his vicinity. Virginia Jure, who publicly accused Andrew of sexual abuse while she was a minor, is at the center of these grave accusations. She described being forced into meetings with the prince, including in the homes of infamous cronies, in her testimonies and interviews. Andrew has denied the claims, but they have resulted in numerous lawsuits and constant public attention. However, these claims' tenacity draws attention to a concerning fact. In addition to reducing accountability everywhere, status, money, and connections open doors for others. There is a common pattern that connects these serious accusations to the daily lives of royal employees. Innocence is the result of protection and power. It was frequently required of staff members to put up with Andrew's rude or immature actions in silence, conscious that challenging a senior royal could jeopardize their reputations or positions. Maids, valets, and security guards were taught to follow orders rather than question them. Fear of retaliation kept many people mute, and loyalty was required. Inappropriate behavior went unnoticed for years because the same system that protected him from accountability inside the palace was also in place outside. This trend can be seen in even small complaints, such as insulting those who failed him, awakening valets at strange hours, or demanding that employees arrange teddy bears in a certain way. Although these actions appear little at first glance, a troubling continuity becomes apparent when considered in the context of the serious accusations. Someone who is used to doing without repercussions. Anyone in his sphere of influence may have their rights, safety, and comfort subordinated to his whims and desires. Beyond privilege, the palace's gilded walls hid a system that allowed injustice to continue unchecked. A man shielded by hierarchy whose actions continuously took advantage of the disconnect between power and accountability is revealed by the combination of staff testimony and public accusations. Even while the home situations are not criminal, they do reveal early indications of a mindset in which status trumped morals and entitlement over empathy. The repercussions were far more severe when these trends spread to upper society, with social influence, safety, and silence concealing harm from the general population. A clear picture is shown when domestic staff complaints are linked to more general allegations of wrongdoing. Prince Andrew's actions weren't unique, rash, or misinterpreted. It was fostered by a culture of institutional sheltering, fear, and unquestioning allegiance. The same dynamic that permitted more serious wrongdoing to take place beyond the palace's gates is reflected in every demand, trick, and nasty gesture made inside. Now, how did layers of protection, devotion, and fear transform Andrew from a pampered king into someone who felt empowered by impunity? Watch closely as we untangle this intricate web. The way the palace fostered Andrew's sense of entitlement. Loyalty is more than just a virtue in the royal family. It is an unwritten rule that influences all interactions and choices. For many palace employees, their service became an integral part of their life. Young recruits frequently started in their late teens and stayed at home for decades. Financial security, identity, and employment were also closely linked that leaving, raising doubts, or even expressing discomfort could jeopardize everything they had established. It was not just a location of labor in the palace. It was their whole universe, and the currency that kept them alive was loyalty. According to insiders, fear and loyalty coexist in this world. Employees received training on both serving and understanding their roles. A reminder, often subtly, that their purpose was to enforce the royals' power, not to build relationships or friendships. Reporting misbehavior, voicing dissatisfaction, or even questioning a royal's actions was nearly unthinkable. It was an unwritten rule. At all costs, obey, persevere, and maintain the household's reputation. The consequences of disobedience could be humiliation, termination, or worse. Dependency on money exacerbated this control. Over many years, many employees have moved up from low-level jobs to dependable responsibilities in the home. In addition to losing a salary, leaving meant losing social networks, housing, pensions, and a sense of purpose connected to royal service. The royals could be very critical of even small mistakes, which further reinforced the idea that keeping quiet was usually the best course of action. The comforts and stability of palace life served as unseen bonds that maintained employee compliance long after basic loyalty may have waned. Another level of constraint was given by institutional protection. A nearly impenetrable barrier was built around the family by the palace's hierarchy, rigid rules, and devoted top officials. Speaking up looked futile because of the involvement of administrators, security guards, and seasoned householders in upholding law and order and preserving the royals' reputation. Due to the system's own emphasis on the family's reputation, misconduct might continue in private. Institutional protection, fear, and loyalty all worked together to promote long-term quiet. For years, even problematic behavior could go unreported or unchecked, allowing employees to suffer in silence. As a survival tactic in a society where challenging authority may lead to one's personal and professional demise, obedience became instinctive. Employees saw entitlement, cruelty, and misbehavior firsthand. But behind closed doors, their voices were mostly limited to whispers. While those closest to the family were caught between duty and conscience, the royal household was shielded from observation in this meticulously regulated setting. The cycle was strengthened by each act of loyalty, resulting in a system where privilege predominated and power was unchallenged. At last, Prince Andrew's actual character has come to light. So, are there any more secrets about him that remain hidden behind royal doors? Your opinions are welcome in the comments section. Remember to like and subscribe.